themselves to death, and we pray them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Steve Jobs revolutionized the lives of the everyday American with the introduction of the personal computer into the home. He, along with Steve Wozniak, made a home computer possible and necessary in a world where computers occupied rooms and were owned by corporations. Jobs' unbounded vision was the driver of Apple's success in the consumer electronics market. He was known for never taking no for an answer and refusing to settle for anything less than perfection. Jobs' leadership is what made Apple what it is today, one of the largest computer companies in the world. His legacy can not only be seen in the products that Apple produces, but also in how most modern companies conduct business. Steve Jobs might never have been the Steve Jobs that we know had he not grown up in Silicon Valley. Founded by aviation giants in the early 20th century, favorable weather, abundance of land, and willing investors made the West Coast a logical choice for aviation companies. The aviation industry and electronics industry were deeply connected and codependent. Large companies pulled talented electrical and mechanical engineers from across the country, making Silicon Valley densely packed with technological geniuses. Many small businesses were founded to support the aviation industry, fostering a culture of entrepreneurs. Such density of engineers and businessmen led to giant innovations like the transistor, and developed an intelligent culture with a drive to succeed that would be imprinted on later generations, something that Jobs saw firsthand and internalized. The 1960s and 70s brought many new ideas, but the biggest and most important was the cultural shift in the way new products were made. Traditionally, most groundbreaking inventions were produced by one or two individuals who focused on economics and functionality rather than design and utility. This was not the case in the new Silicon Valley. By 1970, a decrease in weapons spending and an increase in environmentalist movements introduced uncertainty into the defense industry. Goliath companies laid off their employees and scrapped new research because of the financial uncertainty. Now unemployed engineers turned into hobbyists, producing small-scale computers for home use, to replace the corporate ones they had once worked on. Hundreds of small computer companies began in Silicon Valley, but because of their complexity, they were useless to the average consumer. Steve Jobs was 15, young and eager to make an impression on the world. He was confident that he could produce a more advanced, cheaper, and more intuitive machine than any other he had seen. Steve Jobs was born on February 25, 1955. He was quickly put up for adoption and was adopted by Clara and Paul Jobs. Clara was an accountant and Paul was a machinist. From an early age, Steve's parents influenced him. His mother helped instill a financial responsibility into him, and his father fostered his love of electronics at an early age. Steve and his dad would disassemble and rebuild old electronics in the family garage. In these early years, Steve learned confidence, tenacity, and mechanical prowess. These traits would go on to define him throughout his life and set him apart from the masses of other computer businessmen. Like many intelligent children, Steve struggled with traditional education. Steve took more interest in learning what he wanted to rather than what the curriculum was. His fourth grade teacher often bribed him into doing his work. Regardless of what he studied, Steve tested well, and it was recommended that he advance to high school at an early age, but his parents refused. In 1971, while Steve was at Homestead High School, he met his future business partner, Steve Wozniak. Wozniak attended the nearby University of California at Berkeley. Despite the age gap between them, Jobs and Wozniak bonded over their shared love of electronics and computer design and became friends. After high school, Jobs enrolled at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, but still struggled with education. He dropped out only 6 months after he enrolled, but elected to sit in on classes he enjoyed for the next 18 months. In 1974, Jobs went to work at Atari as a video game designer. However, like his college career, his employment was short-lived. Steve's upbringing and influences led him to be his own boss. However, he did not know what he wanted to be in charge of just yet. In 1976, Jobs left for India on a spiritual journey, where he traveled the subcontinent and experimented with hallucinogens and other drugs. Later that year, he returned to Silicon Valley with a vision of a personal computer company. Jobs and Wozniak started Apple on April 1st, 1976. When Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple in Jobs' parents' garage, the computer was well established. However, the computers of that age were either massive and very expensive or were built for the hobbyist, worthless to the average consumer. The co-founder of Intel, Gordon Moore, once said, quote, "One of our engineers came up with the idea that you could build a computer and put it in the home. I asked what it would be good for, and the only application that I got back was that a housewife could put her recipes on it. I imagined my wife with a computer by the stove. It didn't seem very practical." End quote. Jobs' early life growing up in Silicon Valley greatly affected how he valued technology. He had access to technology as a child, which led him to envision an intuitive computer that could be used by anyone, not just the hobbyist. With Jobs as the visionary and leader, and Wozniak handling the more technical side of things, they set out to make their dream a reality. Jobs sold his Volkswagen bus and Wozniak his scientific calculator in order to raise the startup funds that they needed. Together, they created the Apple I, and it instantly grew popular. Unlike other computers of the day, the Apple I was sold fully assembled, and that all was required was a monitor and a keyboard to run it. No additional assembly was required. This innovation expanded the market from hobbyists to the average person, forever altering how computers were used. Sadly, the next several products by Apple, save the Apple II, were not nearly as successful, and in 1984, Steve Jobs was systematically phased out of Apple. Jobs went on to found a software company named Next, and purchased an animation studio from George Lucas that would later go on to become Pixar. Jobs invested $50 million of his own money into Pixar. The company went on to produce classics like Toy Story, The Incredibles, and Finding Nemo. In 1996, Apple acquired Jobs' software company Next for $429 million, and he reintegrated into Apple. Jobs appointed a new management team and took only a salary of $1 per year. Once again, under Jobs' leadership, Apple captured the consumer's interest and produced quality products like the iMac.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing, and it's totally true. And the reason is because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, if you're not having fun doing it, you don't really love it, you're going to give up.
Since the mid-1990s, Apple has captivated the American consumer with innovative and accessible technology. Apple was unique and prioritized the consumer's needs over all else and delivered products that were intuitive and easy to use for the everyday American. Jobs' personal legacy can be seen in almost every piece of technology that surrounds us in everyday life. His unrelenting drive for success is forever imprinted on the functional and easy-to-use phones, computers, and tablets that we all use daily. Even outside the world of products that he created, Jobs revolutionized modern business tactics and sales strategies, ushering in a new era of ruthless and cunning practices. Jobs demonstrated the importance of marketing the product for what it is and never ceasing to innovate. His non-quitting attitude pushed those around him and his company to the top of the market. Even years after his death in 2011, Apple refuses to give up his sacred values. Jobs inspired a generation of young people and welcomed a new technological era, regardless of what it might bring.